Yes, thank you for inviting me. So I will talk about how needs-based service development can help you build better product offers or service offers and marketing strategies based on insight into the forest owner's needs and motivations. First of all, it will allow you to see your customers and potential customers in a new perspective by segmenting based on needs and motivations rather than other characteristics. And those insights in turn will allow you to create more value for the customer and your target segments. And by delivering more value for your customers, you can also then increase customer loyalty, and you can also develop marketing and sales strategies that would actually increase your profitability over time. And I've used these techniques and tools myself as a sales manager and also in product and service development, both towards consumers and also towards business clients. And I've found it to be very, very effective. So if we start by looking at a different perspective on forest owners and their needs and motivations, usually you can use different types of information to segment your customers and the market as a whole. Often you use demographics like property size if you're more like business oriented, or gender, age. You could look at behavior factors such as how the customer interacts with you and what kind of business volume or like purchasing patterns they have. You could also look at geographicals. Often as a forest owner, you can see when you're approached because you live in a city, or if you're approached because you live in the countryside. And there's also the psychographic types of information like values, attitudes, and motivation. And of course, those are much more difficult to gauge. But if you start to work with them, they will allow you to develop much more powerful tools when you want to understand your customers and their needs. Values and motivation, and often, I guess in silviculture, it's a bit, and looking at forest owners, it's a bit more tricky than other segments, because in a way you're dealing both with individuals that are more like customers or individuals, and at the same time a forest owner is also running a business, so there's also this kind of business perspective to it. And when there's more of a business perspective, I found that often motivational characteristics are quite useful, while if you look at customers, you look at much more of values, lifestyle type of information. So here's just a few examples. They're a bit business-based. They can also be much more value-based, such as what is the main motivation for a forest owner? Is it profitability and cash flow? Is it to increase value, asset value over time, and maybe for the next generation? Is it to develop non-financial values, such as perhaps increase biodiversity? Is it to have financial security? Or could it be other things like also a sense of maybe solidarity, or maybe obligation, or other types of more fundamental and value-based characteristics. So when you want to develop a segment model for your customers based on these more psychographic features, there's quite a lot of trial and error involved, and it's really a test and learn process. And you have to try to figure out what drivers are distinct in your case. So would the market of the customers, potential customers, be well distributed or not? And are they distinct from one another? So it's really kind of an iterative process to find what is true for your market. But once you find what's true for your market, you will really see that it makes you see your customers in a different perspective. So this is an example where I've just kind of played around. So it's not an answer as such, but a way that you could look at it. And I've used profitability and to develop non-financial values. And that gives me 4 different characteristics. So here, a person that's very focused on profitability, but not so much interested in developing other types of values, I would call that person the investor. A person that looks both at profitability and other values, that could be the multi-use owner. Someone who's not so interested in profitability, but very much in developing out these other values. That could be the leisure owner. So in this example, maybe a hunter. And the person that isn't interested in either, maybe that's more of an accidental forest owner, person who happens to just own forest, but never had it as their strategy. So once you've found a segmentation that's relevant to you, you can start to look at segment size. So what's the market value for you in the different segments? How many customers are there? What do you think the growth trends are in these segments? Are there segments that are growing or segments that are actually declining? And from your perspective, what kind of potential for profitability would you have in different segments as well? But it's not just about picking a segment that looks good to you. You also have to look internally or look at your own business and see whether there is a strategic fit between your business and the customer segment that you would like to work with. So one step is to identify where you are today. Where are you competitive? So I've marked this with the orange circle. And also look at your competitors. Where are they stronger and where do they gain business more than you do? And also, where would you want to be? So I marked this as the orange star. And what would it take for you to make that transition? How would you have to develop your service offer? How do you need to change your marketing strategies, your sales strategies in order to make that move? And it's also a question of, are there segments where you definitely don't want to be? And that will help you become more effective in your sales and marketing strategies, because then you don't have to target those groups. In order to actually paint this picture and these characteristics, you have to understand what is value for each segment and what are their needs and what would constitute a benefit. And that will allow you to create customer value for these groups. So if we look at one of these examples, you can use a tool that's called the value pyramid, and it's used in many different settings, both for branding, but also for product development. So this is one version of the value pyramid that will allow you to understand customer value. So in this case, we're looking at a service that could be property management, for example, and we can look at the investor as your target segment. And the investor would be like, his focus would be to grow my asset. So in terms of values and motivations, things that asset growth, profitability, risk management are more of like business motivations. You can also, of course, identify more personal values for the investor. So, of course, the types of, often you describe your service in terms of your service features that we have at the bottom of the pyramid. And that would be like, well, features like we have annual planning meetings, we provide financial planning and analysis, we do inspections on your forest land, we help you with the sourcing and finding suppliers, and also control them and how they do their, check them and how they do their work. But actually, if you would look at the benefit to the investors, that would be things like, well, I have expert advice, I don't have to worry about administration. So that would be the benefit to the investor as your customer. And if you look at emotional benefits, these functional benefits would allow the investor to feel like that they have financial security, it will make them successful, they're in control, gives them efficiency, etc., and how they use their time. By describing your value to the customer in terms of not only functional benefits, or not only features and not only functional benefits and not only emotional benefits, the customer will have a much larger perceived value. And if that value then is greater than the price, well, that's really when you have value. So when the benefits are greater than the price the customer actually has to pay, that's when you've created value. And you can use this kind of method in actually seeing how different types of segments could perceive the same service in different ways. Here's an example of a multi-user and the hunter. And if your product or service is a wetland restoration, it would mean very different things for these different segments. So for the hunter, it would be more about game wetland, creating a habitat for game, increasing the population of game, while for the multi-user, it's more of biodiversity, water management, and things like that. So the same service, but then expressed and in different functional benefits or emotional benefits, will actually have different perceived values for different customer segments. So this was, there are some examples where you can look at this in real life. Like in Sweden, you have the company Skogspartner and Orangutang, where you can go in and look at how they've chosen different segments and how they've developed values and communication targeted to these segments. And so as a summary, this is a process that is a bit cumbersome, but when you get it right, it will add a lot of value to your business and also allow you to cut cost in many ways and develop more stronger customer loyalty and customer relations. So thank you.